Well, I just had to do a little sound check before coming on here. The problem was that I had my Bluetooth headset kind of connected and needed to disconnect that before I could do this video and get the sound to come through. So I do have a little thing to show today, and I will say, if you've seen some of my previous videos, you know how I came out with little scraps of African mahogany that were about this shape and carved little gerbils out of them. I took out the little walnut piece and tried to make another one today, and it just so happened that the two front feet didn't come out right for that. It was really hard to see what I was doing because of the way that the wood was so dark and the lines were so dark against it that some of the cuts just didn't get out in the right places. There's probably other ones we're going to kind of make along here too, to that matter. Make sure we get them out like exactly as they need to be. There was one particular one there where I probably didn't cut it right enough or thin enough to really be able to make it, so we've got little places to do here. And I just do kind of want to say, for all this little work that's being done, it's taking its way to us, and I'd say for my day today, I do want to mention what it came out as. It came out in the shape of a little raccoon, and it's going to be simple to paint the white stripes on this tail, maybe kind of paint a little white muzzle and a white forehead to give it a black mask in the middle like a raccoon has. And there's also just some work to the carving part that we're going to kind of go to show a little more how to do that. And right now there's been a few places we kind of did along the last time around. We're going to try to work on those spots a little more this time around. And I sort of got the tails out the last time around, or the legs. We sort of did them first because they were kind of in just the right place to come out as they ought to. So we just did that little bit of work just to come along with it and to make it so it could come out the way it had to be or needed to be, just to put a little work inside of what we do. And oh, the times in our lives when this little work shall pay us off in the end. And I'd say we're going to try to kind of, on this one, try to make the legs come out the same as they did on the first. And for this little bit of work, perhaps just a little time to spend where I've cut that extra line to make it so it kind of has the little extra area for its front leg, like the raccoon does have a little bit longer legs than the gerbil does in the front and back. So that's a little work we kind of do along here, make it so it looks just as bright as the noonday dawn. And so it's going to be the time that we work along here, make it this just a little bit of a better thing to go in the end. For we got little cuts to make, and we're going to show how they do. And this little work is gonna be a little thing that is going to make us all just happier little people in the end. There's little strange things we've seen in life, and I tell y'all something, people. I just remember I volunteered at a wildlife center before. There was just a lot that was in that place, and we had little raccoons that stayed in little cages. We took them out and fed them. Occasionally, I would kind of put my fingers through the cage and feel their paws come up to my hand and see what how leather their paws really felt. It was just interesting little experiences we had with our wildlife there. And I'd say probably the time when I felt like I was the closest to Mother Earth was the time when I held a baby raccoon in my lap and fed it. Luckily, I had somebody there to help me that first time, but, you know, I kind of discovered that was a little job I couldn't do. My hands were way too strong, and I really couldn't hold its face in a comfortable way. You know, there's just a certain ways you have to do it just to be gentle with them. I couldn't be gentle enough. The problem is that, you know, I'd try to hold them in a way so I wouldn't get bitten by them, because I didn't want to get bitten, but it was just one of those things where, you know, it was just really hard to get them to take their bottle without getting a little bite from them, so it was kind of not exactly my piece of work to do it. And so there's been times and places where we volunteered different ways, did different little things. The way I've just always loved animals as much as I have, in the way that in my days as a kid, they were just one of the things I often talked about. Lots of times other kids weren't so interested, so they didn't want to hear, didn't want to learn, but all the things I could say to them or tell them were just things that it was all hard for them to get, because, you know, if it didn't interest them, there was just certain information you couldn't convince them of. So, written a lot of stories about that. Sometimes I'd tell kids about the numbat that lives in Australia, which that and a wombat are two different things. Kids knew what the wombat was, but they didn't know what the numbat was, so, you know, they, you know, would kind of think I was mistaken a numbat for a wombat when I talked about one. I've shared little stories in my little articles that I put my work into to tell people about, and that's been one of the articles that's been shared. You can see now here I've cut along to make the front and back feet and the little ears in the back, so it comes a little time to sort of make out the back of the head. The raccoon is going to come out a good way, make it so it's going to be a brighter thing to read and see in the very long run of the day. And as for a little more work we put into what we do, I say it's a good thing we keep our thumb guard on, because, you know, you can really get cut when you're doing such extreme type of work as this, I say. And come down to it, the little lines are going to make themselves up to you, make it so you're going to see little great things come along, and all the things that were always said in the scripture that Jesus said we do many great things in his name. It's always been great for one person to the next, and I've seen God work through a lot of people in some of the most mysterious ways. People have always had good testimonies to share of all the work he's kind of done in their lives. And I do want to say, as I mentioned in a status on Facebook earlier, this piece of walnut was a little bit tougher than those pieces of African mahogany that I used for making the gerbils. And when it all just came down to it, it all just came down to being some work that comes and goes and lasts us into life itself a long, long way, I'll say. Long, long way. So, I say, we've got to take care of this, make it so it's going to be brighter days coming. I do think there's going to be a little difference in how these two came out, because with this one, there was a little error to come along in the making of the head, but I think we're going to go back and fix that to kind of make it so that even the back of its face is the same as the back of the face of this other one too. And as for how it's going to go, we see a little ways of work coming along. We're kind of got to chip along this little back here, and it's going to be hard to make it. The tail is thin on this tough piece as it was on the African mahogany, because it was a different piece. And so you'll see on this one we kind of made the tail a little bit turn out a little wider for this than it did for the gerbil. So for the little work we add along, take a little ways that we go. And I say, this little time in our lives, we say that work is work, craft is craft. It's all kind of taking the things they do and making it all lighten in on us. We know that there's been so much to say in life. Kind of mention how people talk about how human beings are of the animal kingdom too, which they are. There's been so much debate over the years over what people thought the smartest animal next to a human was. And from all I read in books, it was creatures like chimpanzees, gorillas, creatures like that. There was little Coco the gorilla in those days. She learned her sign language, you know. She was real good to those little kittens. And that was one of the things that we learned about how gorillas were good to kittens just like people were. Thinking about that story about how there was that kid at the zoo fell into the gorilla's cage, and the gorilla was trying to save the kid's life, and they shot him. So some people thought all this stuff was sad. They probably thought the gorilla would have done the kid some harm, but it was smart, it was intelligent, it was trying to save the kid of all things. So trying to do its best to keep the kid out of danger from what some people understood. So some people just think little dangers when they see things like that, but it manages to take care of things that will be in the long run so much better to know for us. So much to learn in life about creativity. I've heard it said that creatures could do different things. We know for one thing that it's kind of like how, people teach parrots how to talk. And yes, parrots can mimic words, but they can't understand human language, so you can't really have a conversation with one. I think I just took a little big piece of hunk of wood out of its back here, but I tell you what, there's a little place where it kind of almost evens out in the back with the other one, so that's a good thing. We've got to kind of make it so this tail gets a point in the end like the other one did, and finally do some work along here. I'd say there's just a bit of work that can be harder to recognize here and there, and I say that there's just little strange things that come about us in life, so we see little unusualities come along, and I say we're coming to the point where we're about to get down to trimming the tail, about to where it needs to be, and so with these little cuts we're making, we're lining it up just right, making it so it's gonna come out the best way it can come out. And so with a little help from ourselves and from each other, there's a lot we can learn to do, and finally making it so the tail kind of has a little place in it, kind of similar on the back of the other one, where it kind of has little places where it separates from the body here to make it do a little good here. And so I say it's just kind of like work that's being done in the world for us all. Make us all see fit the things we need to see. Some creatures will be recognized and others won't, but it all depends on what people get the most familiar with in life. Some people like raccoons, and there's some people who keep them as pets, some people who kind of like rehab them from the wild, and sometimes I've been in places where even wild animals that lost their mothers due to hunters and car accidents and things like that were sometimes brought in there to be rehabbed, and we took care of them when they were young, and then we sort of put them away into a little shelter in the outdoor space of the center, where we'd kind of leave them by themselves a while and let their instincts take over before they were sent back out in the wild. And because otherwise, the problem is they get too used to humans. I've always heard it said there are some creatures that, you know, if you raise them in captivity and release them into the wild, when they grow up, they won't survive because they haven't learned how to hunt. They haven't learned how to recognize their predators. They haven't learned how to, and they're going to be so used to humans that they're going to go near hunters. I'd say for this moment, we finally got the body carved out here, and on the tails for both, there's a little place here we're going to probably work on eventually, but I'd say my hands are getting tired and my voice is getting a little tired. Might need to give the video a little break and come on and do that extra work in the next one. So I thank you all for watching, and goodbye.